All right, I think we're ready to go now, so I will turn things over to today's presenters. We have with us Jennifer Cannizzaro, Vice President of Product Marketing at Responsive, and Julia Duke, COO of APMP. Take it away, Julia.
Oh, thank you so much, Darby. I'm so happy to be here. As Darby said, I am the Chief Operating Officer for APMP and our association, and I'm glad to be here today with Jennifer to discuss the 2025 State of Strategic Response Management Survey report that we worked with Responsive together to get this information for our members to help elevate your careers. We're very excited. And Jennifer, I know your team led the project here for this survey. So let's get into some of this information, do a deep dive. And do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Awesome.
it's always helpful to have the context around the research and truly, one, really appreciate the partnership with APMP. The voice of this community and the membership is so important here. We had just over 700 organizations globally participate, over 200 APMP members. So thank you to all of you out there who participated. And really, we're trying to take a holistic look. So global view across industries, across organizations of different sizes. And we always have a focus on really the revenue function broadly. So yes, it is bid and proposal teams, but we really looked across the board from a proposal writer all the way up to a chief revenue officer and other executives, because we really wanted to pull out the broader trends and context in which your teams are operating. So if we go to the next slide, the next piece of this is really the setup around how we delineated leading organizations and novices. This is something that if you're familiar with last year's report, you would have seen as well. At the end of the day, we really want to help you elevate your companies, grow your careers. And so what better way to do that than to look at what high performing, high growth organizations are doing. And that's exactly how we defined leaders, was really cut by revenue growth broadly. So over 25% year on year, as well as revenue growth related to RFP specifically. And then we also looked at, higher win rates broadly. So you'll see as we go, as we engage throughout this conversation, when I mention a leader or novice, this is essentially how we set it up.
Very cool. So let's dig into this research and we wanted to start with buyer behavior because that's super important. This data shows like a growing complexity with tighter budgets, more stakeholders, faster expectations. Jennifer, what do you think is driving all of that?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting to just start with the bigger picture here. And there are some tensions in this data, and it's something that we hear a lot when we're engaging with our customers and with this community. You're seeing here that buyers want more, they expect more, they want more personalized responses, they want faster responses. Meanwhile, there are elongated or more stringent approval processes on their end, and they're really dealing with tighter budgets, among other things. Now, I have to say, in a lot of conversations that I'm having around, what do we make of this? What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
I think AI is behind some of this. And, for a few different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One is there is this dialogue. It's no longer really about, are you using AI? It's how are you using AI? I went to a conference a year ago, a Forrester B2B conference, and there is a whole session on like AI on AI, both sides of the table. I think that that's actually happening right now. I've heard proposal teams tell me they've seen just this explosive growth in questions that they're answering, whether that's in an RFP or there's an entirely new assessment that they're fielding. There was one customer who said they saw something that was previously had been like 250 questions a year, go to 800 questions. And I remember her saying AI had to be behind that, because it's so easy to just say, oh, hey, write me all these questions. And then there's, I think, maybe this expectation that it's fine because it'll be really easy for them to answer those because they're probably using AI to take a first pass. And so, it gets very meta if you really think about this. But I do think part of this is, there is an expectation that AI is being used, or even that, maybe at your own organization, you've got a lot of initiatives around how can we embed AI into the process to drive growth and efficiency and personalization and all of these things. And that's kind of getting pushed onto, bid processes or externalized into the buying process. But, one thing remains true is that this is still about winning. And at the same time, while there may be an expectation that AI is getting utilized or maybe creating some of these trends, you can tell what I like to say is, if you can tell that someone used AI, they probably didn't use it well.
Right.
In terms of a response or content or anything like that. I've said that to my own team, actually, is,
Yeah.
Buyers are still very discerning and they do have a higher bar. And so it's not just using it to use it, but in the ways that are really going to give you an advantage. One of the things that I thought was interesting that came out in our SRM summit recently along the lines of personalization was really the importance of kind of the tail ends of the process. So how can you get off to the right footing with a solid pursuit strategy? And also, if everyone's kind of using AI for responding in the middle of the process, those responses should still be good, but could we maybe invest more time in the oral presentation to really stand out and get more creative there? So I think really interesting trends here and kind of the forces at play driving them.
Yeah, well, I don't think that the tighter budget issue is going to get better anytime soon, unfortunately. And as far as AI, you're absolutely right. It puts people under immense pressure to be using it well. And I've heard that from our members, is that growing like concern about how do we keep up.
Yeah.
So now let's take next slide, please. Let's take a look at this. I think this is really interesting. So these are the perceptions of how both executives, and we're talking like director level and up, and practitioners view proposal teams. And we can see from here there's, some differences in how they view these, and especially when we're looking at that bottom left cube there, that they're well resourced. I mean, 78% to 43% practitioners feel they're well resourced versus the 78% executives think bid and proposal teams are well resourced. What do you think is driving these trends, Jennifer?
Yeah, you point out one of, I think, several gaps here, and certainly the bottom two jump off the page as
Yeah.
quite significant gaps in terms of resourcing and satisfaction. And the sort of dichotomy amongst the top row and bottom row is even interesting, because you've got executives who are saying, hey, these strategic response teams are really important. They're revenue drivers, they're business partners. And generally you're seeing agreement there. I will say I'm always a little shocked by the top right around the perception as a strategic business partner, where executives are actually, much more likely to agree with that statement than all of you, the teams out there doing the work. And, I like to call attention to this because, and I'll probably mention this more than once today, like, I think so much of this is mindset. There's one of our customers says, convince yourself and then convince your boss. And so I'm stealing that from her because I think it's such great wisdom, and that really makes a difference in the way that you're all showing up. Is, believe in, I know you believe in what you're doing, but you're growth drivers, you are partners, you're driving strategy. And I think, even just a shift in mindset or how you're framing the role of the team can go a long way. Now, when we look at the gaps on the bottom around resourcing and satisfaction, I don't think that there's poor intent here on behalf of executives. I think it's simply that they're not as close to the work that you're doing. And so it's less, it's less that they don't appreciate the work. In fact, I think they probably do. They just don't really know what's going on beyond the surface. And so it is an opportunity to really educate them and bring them along with you and speak the language of executives when you're really speaking to what you're doing day to day and the impact that it's driving, more so the lead with impact.
Right. Well, I know it's just getting them on board that this is actually very strategic in the process. It's not just, let me fill out these forms and, be compliant. So, Jennifer, I guess like looking at this, the big question is how do we lessen these gaps?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll focus more on the bottom piece because I already mentioned on the top kind of it does start with mindset, but it really is like, how are you speaking the language of executives? So how can you show $1 into this function is X dollars out and what drives that? Because at the end of the day, if you've got someone, C-suite VP, whatever it may be, they're first and foremost having a conversation about revenue, about the bottom line. They're looking at the stuff that goes on financial statements, right? And that's whether or not you're, publicly, privately owned. Like, these are conversations that happen in the boardroom and executive meetings. So how do you really lead with what they care about? But then, ladder up to that to say what's really driving that. Beyond that, I think there's actually an opportunity as you're telling this story through data to really share insights that they may not have on their own. I've actually heard some interesting dialogue amongst this community where, water cooler conversation, I suppose, where folks will say, we're teaching sales how to do their jobs better, or put a bid in front of any proposal person and they can tell you whether you're going to win it or not. Now, I do think it's important to not just have that go on gut, but actually have data to back that up. And I think that is a real opportunity to say, look, we've got this set of bids that we've pursued. Here's kind of a win-loss analysis. And then something comes before you. And there's always this lovely tension, maybe with the sales organization. They want to pursue it. You say, I don't think it's worth the time. Why? And, I've seen leaders invest the time to actually unpack that a little bit and say, here's why it's not a good idea. And here's where I'd use that time instead. I would be working on these opportunities. And then, like, as you're doing that and you get the buy-in, how do you prove that out? Like, these are the growth areas. This is where we're winning. Let's do more of that. And if something's not performing, maybe you diagnose and figure out why, and you course correct the strategy. And so I think it's really through both that, the reporting and making the business case to invest in the function, dollar in, dollars out, as well as sharing some of those insights and being able to drive to areas of growth and say, here's how that's working or not. Like, that will get the attention of an executive. And it is also kind of walking from the view of the data that they may have to everything that's making that work. So, if you're underwater, why is that? Like, you're swimming in opportunities and we need to do a better job of prioritizing them, or we need to bring in AI to do this. Those conversations can be really powerful.
Yeah. Well, as you said, we have so many more opportunities now and so many more questions, and the demand on responding is so high. So being strategic in evaluating, but being able to be that strategic leader in your organization to be able to bring up more wins is key, and that's what we want from our members. So all right, let's look at this next slide. So here we're looking at strategic investments, and we're talking about staffing and technology. And we can see that people are investing more in or less in 2025 and from 2024. So why is that? I mean, that's a big drop, especially when we're looking at staffing.
Yeah, it looks like staffing fell off a cliff, right? If we're perfectly honest here, the investment in technology is pretty steady. And look, let's be honest, AI is a part of that mix.
Mhm.
So organizations are continuing to invest. They're very likely looking at AI, pursuing technology and platforms that have that. And then as a result, maybe as a result, but um, maybe making some trade-offs in terms of hiring. So when we say staffing, it's particularly support for, people on the team. Now, this looks like a very bleak picture. And remember, this is on average, and this shows the year-on-year changes. But if you actually go to the next slide, it's a very different picture when you
Wow.
pull for leaders versus novices. So leaders are that dark blue, and then gray novices. And so what you see here is that leaders are about twice as likely, actually more than that, to be investing in staffing relative to novices. So that's one. And the other thing is when you actually look at those organizations who are saying I'm increasing my investments, it's a not such a far gap between tech and people for those leaders. They're investing in both. And so it's not an either or. I like to say that it's about AI and people, not or people. And that is truly what we're seeing here. And we've talked about this in the SRM summits that we've held across different BPC events and in just a lot of the conversations that we're having with this community every day. And I think what it comes down to is, yes, AI can absolutely enhance roles, and that's going to benefit all of us, but you still need people to be driving, to provide that guidance, to use the technology, to really do the higher value work and work hand in glove with technology, AI or otherwise. And if you're focused on the right things, then you're growing the business and growing the team. And so I think that is a real opportunity here. And look, there may be organizations who are making trade-offs. I also think, and I'm starting to see in the broader landscape, that organizations that go too far on I'm going to lean on tech, but not on my team. I think there may be a correction
Yeah.
because it really is how do you get those two pieces working in harmony, and not to mention the processes around it. We define strategic response management as the people, practices, and technology that are really unlocking organizational knowledge to drive growth. And I think it's so important to be grounded in that because it is really that holistic view that makes the engine hum, so to speak. So I think that's one of the opportunities here.
Well, you said it earlier. It's like the people who are using AI well, right? It's not just having the AI, but and you need the staff to do that. So overall, what is the lesson here for these leaders of these teams?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is it's really important, and I mentioned this earlier with the
Mm.
executive conversation, it's really important to have a clear strategy, especially when it comes to how you're deploying technology and AI specifically. How are you using it? Where are you using it? What's the impact? Where is it working? Where isn't it working? And how is your team really working hand in glove to do that? So there is a business case around all of this as well. The other thing that we didn't talk about here, but that we've had a lot of great dialogue around, is really the importance of training. I know this is something that
Mhm.
APMP is very passionate about, but with respect to AI, you've got people, and I see this on my own team or in our own organization, you've got people building AI agents, and you've got people who are still struggling to prompt, and maybe even another class that's still skeptical about AI. I think that's narrowing, but it's really a spectrum. And so I do think there's a lot of healthy conversation in this community around
Mhm.
what can we do to really rise together and rise to this occasion as we're navigating this ever-changing landscape, to make sure that we are working with AI, working with technology, working together to really get to the right place.
Yeah, well, training, as you know, you mentioned it before, is really important to APMP, and that's why we're really excited to be. We've just launched our SRM micro certification along with our AI micro certification. So, we want to give our members all those opportunities to upskill and to really demonstrate their competencies. So, all right, let's switch gears here again, Jennifer. This is fun. Let's talk about organizational knowledge. And this is another area for investment within these organizations and companies. And it's a reoccurring topic with our members, how critical knowledge management is and how people are in the profession are practicing their knowledge, organizational knowledge. So, we all know that it's really tough. That's, I think, the number one complaint is always working with SMEs, right? Getting anything out of them. It's like herding cats, biggest frustration. So, what did the research show on this topic?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the data here, it's really looking at kind of both pieces of like what I call like knowledge in and knowledge out. And you're
Mhm.
right, Julia. I don't think a day goes by where I don't hear a comment about how difficult SMEs are. And I always chuckle a little bit because I've always been in that role as a SME. I'm like, oh, I'm difficult. Okay. Uh, but people I do think there are a lot of well-intentioned SMEs and it can just be hard
Mhm.
to, get the time or get the
Right.
rhythm. But, broadly, we were looking across a few different dimensions here when we're looking at a knowledge democratization. So from a knowledge in perspective, it's really just starting with, hey, I've got some centralized repository where I'm housing this information. On the knowledge outside, it's really, are you able to develop processes for self-service, and can individuals across the organization really tap into this knowledge in different ways, whether that's, okay, yes, you're using it for bids, but can a salesperson use that same body of knowledge to respond to an email that came in with 5 questions from a prospect, or to complete a security questionnaire, or better yet, to stand up a trust center and not have to complete that security questionnaire. And so, we talk about the importance of this knowledge base. Like, this is a craft, and you are all stewards of, arguably the most valuable IP in the business. This is the best there is because it
Mhm.
has to be differentiated, current, compliant, compelling. That is the stuff that goes into the really revenue generating responses that you're driving. But when we looked across these areas, really it's only about a third of organizations that are doing any of these things well, both
Mhm.
really bringing that into a centralized place, designing for self-service, designing for really anyone in the organization to have this knowledge at their fingertips. And to me, that really just means there's a lot of opportunity out there to have a clear knowledge management strategy, and to really drive more value out of the great work that you're doing. So I think that's really where this can go, to have a lot more value, for your teams, but also for your organizations.
Okay, so number one, how do we change these statistics? And I think we also need to maybe like there's a bigger opportunity with scaling the impact of this knowledge. So, what would be your answer to that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can talk about even kind of the knowledge in, knowledge out, because I think, look, it's a third doing well across the board.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear consistently as it pertains to some of these challenges with SMEs or knowledge management broadly is really just the importance of setting boundaries and having really clear operational rhythms. So, think of it this way, like, you really are curators, and you know how you need to organize this, what you need from whom.
Mhm.
So really, like, have the confidence and the cachet to say, like, here's the knowledge management strategy, here are our expectations, here's how we're going to run this. But also, I've heard some really interesting examples as I'm engaging with different leaders and members of this community. So, for instance, from a knowledge perspective, there might be a calendar that's published around, hey, I expect product to update everything related to our portfolio once a quarter. Here's who's responsible for each product line. And there are customers who are publishing that so that anyone in the company can see it. So talk about visibility, accountability. I
Accountability.
actually love that example
Mhm.
because really, and I heard this, I think maybe at a BPC event as well. It's like when you accept a bid, you're not accepting it for your team, you're accepting it for the company. And this really is a team sport. And it really starts with getting this knowledge. So like have that accountability, establish those rhythms. Another best practice that I've heard that I really liked, and this came from an asset management customer, was with those operational rhythms, they do them, I can't remember if it's monthly or quarterly. So whatever really works for your business. And like the next day, so they'll check in, hey, how, is this up to date? What do we need to change? What trends are on the horizon? So on and so forth. And they will act on that in the next, 24 to 48 hours so that those stakeholders know I heard you, I took action, and then they want to show up to the next meeting. So really being a good partner throughout this, driving accountability, I think is really important. So that's on kind of the SME landscape and how you can really some ideas, I think, for how to really improve that part of the process and kind of level up in that area. For the broader democratization, I think one of the big opportunities here, well, two, I'll say two. One is really the self-service piece. So you see that's quite low. This is such a massive opportunity, especially for the broader field organization. I see sort of different like rungs of impact in terms of where you can take this knowledge. And it's like, it started with you and your team. And the next realm or rung is the sales organization or the field organization. Then it's the whole company. Then maybe it's partners. Then maybe it's customers. I'm not joking. I've heard organizations talk about that because this information is so good. But what I want you to think about is a couple of things. Like one, yeah, sales is hungry and they're pushing you, but what you're giving them is really, it's the best stuff in the business. So how do you actually put more knowledge into their hands and imagine the impact? So the business case around this is incredible. And I would encourage you to drive, as you're driving more around self-service and exposure, to really put the economics behind it. So maybe you have 100 people who've got access to this information today, but it could be 1,000 or it could be 10,000. Maybe it's 10 and it could be 100, right? Like you could 10x your impact if you have more people leveraging this knowledge base. And organizations like Microsoft have quantified this in terms of, the time savings for someone to find an answer to whether it's a question on a call or an email, or even in some organizations, you may have a threshold for the bids that you're taking and the bids that do go to self-service, or you kind of send it back to sales and say, if you want to work this, work it. You're actually going to be able to get more of those if you design for ways that more people can have access, or even potentially have some sort of guided self-service experience to really tackle more of these. So I think there's a business case around it that you can wrap your heads around and really make and partner with sales on it. It's also just an opportunity to improve the partnership with the sales organization. I could give you a handful of stories of leaders that I know who have done this really well. And you know what? They're getting promoted into sales leadership roles because that partnership is so strong in the way they're then being able to scale really these knowledge assets. So I've already talked about this for a long time. It's clearly something I'm passionate about, but I think this is such a massive opportunity to really get more value and impact of the knowledge asset itself that you are really stewarding.
Help me help you. And
Absolutely.
I mean, and yeah, and anytime you can partner with the sales team, I mean, everybody working together, it's going to make those relationships so much better.
For
So
sure.
this is a perfect segue into our next topic, our last topic, AI, which is huge in our industry. So we know that it's increasingly being leveraged by our teams. So this SRM report showed that there's a difference in the way that AI is being implemented by leading teams. So what do you find that leading or top performing teams are doing differently with AI adoption, integration than other companies, and how they can replicate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a great segue too, right? Because we talk all about knowledge and the importance of knowledge as a foundation, and AI is really how you're scaling that. And so, in the research, we looked at a few different cuts. It was broadly organizations who are deploying AI across their go-to-market, deployed for revenue generating activity in the revenue function broadly, and then for RFPs. And so I mean, look, the gaps here between leaders and novices are pretty stark. And so, what I make of this generally is that leaders are really embracing AI in the way they're deploying it. They're 6 times more likely to have deployed AI agents. They're 4 times more likely to have deployed AI across revenue generating activities. And those are pretty sizable differences. So they're not just dabbling, they're embracing, they're doing, they're on the cutting edge. And I think this is also one where, I can look at it and think like, hey, I want to be in the blue, because I'll have a competitive advantage here. And it's really, being able to think about all of the ways that AI can, change the nature of work.
So, and I want to circle back because earlier in our webinar, you mentioned that the range from like a novice up to a leader, right?
Yeah.
Where you said people are doing AI agents versus people who may even don't know how to prompt or may be scared to even use AI. So you mentioned AI agent. Just for those who may not be familiar, what is an AI agent
Yeah.
and why should our community care about that? What makes that what the leaders are doing?
Yeah. Great question. That's always, I do appreciate when we need to define some of the things we're talking about. So, the way to think about an AI agent is that it is performing deeply specialized tasks independently, still working, alongside your team, but the difference is you think about maybe generative AI, it's sort of like, oh, we were just starting to understand Gen AI, and now there's agentic AI. Like, what's going on here, right? This landscape changes, my friends. So,
Quickly.
generative AI is great at summarizing and synthesizing and getting a first draft and that sort of thing. But agents really can do more of these tasks kind of on their own. And in that regard, like it is really like you can think of it more as I'm giving this work to an agent. And I realize that could sound scary. I'm a half glass full person. I'm an optimist, and I think this really is it's a beacon of hope to me in making work better, because now think about like, what can I give to an agent so that I can do more high value strategic activities? But just, to make this a little bit more real for you, I'm going to give you a consumer example, like non-tech, because we can so often get lost in like the world of SaaS and all of these things. And I'll give you one that might pertain to, a platform if you have one. So example of an agent in perhaps your home life would be Roomba. I have a Roomba and I've had one for years. And what do? You say, hey, Roomba, vacuum my floor. And off Roomba goes. And it's dodging your couch. And, maybe your kid left a stuffy out and it's got to negotiate around that. And it learns where it, hit roadblocks or whatever. And then it does better next time. So it's learning, it has the context, and you send it off and it completes the job. And no one was calling that an agent, right? When Roomba launched, I don't even know when that was. It's just Roomba. But Roomba's an agent. So there's like a consumer example. Now, in the world in which you're operating, you could think of a content cleaning agent. So we talk about the importance of knowledge management. Well, one of the things you want to do is, tend to that garden of knowledge, so to speak. So, maybe you're actually looking at, hey, what hasn't been used in the past 6 months? Just put it in an archive. And that's not something that it's what I would guess is that that's work that needs to be done, but that you don't want to do. And that is the right framing to think about use cases that are ripe for AI agents, because it is that mission critical work, but you can actually give the direction and have that task specialization for an agent to go do it for you. So just some ways you might wrap your head around this, but truly, I think this is a make work better movement. And I sometimes describe it as like you're the head chef and the agent is the sous chef. And so you got like the agent's chopping the vegetables just so, but you're the one who's really, reimagining the menu and bringing the right recipes together to deliver a stunning presentation and a delicious meal. Don't take that too far, but some people have told me they like that. So
I do like it. And what it does is it paints a picture of our profession in that, having the efficiencies of using AI allows you that time and space to be more strategic, to do the things that possibly you didn't have the time and space because you were so busy with drafting the first draft and doing all the things that now AI is helping you with. So it allows us to work smarter. And I love that. So let's go to the next slide. There's, as we know, a lot of conversations about AI replacing roles, and we saw that with the staffing numbers going down before. But the data here is suggesting something different.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is what we saw broadly in this research, and I don't know that we had a slide on this, but it came out in the trends and the analysis, is that organizations that are adopting and embracing AI, they are twice as likely to be hiring. And I think that's very important to have in the back of your mind, because it really comes down to AI and people and how are these really working together. So this is an opportunity to reimagine work. And we're having a lot of conversations around, how are roles evolving? And you can see here, we asked really about roles that have a lot of potential and promise with AI to be enhanced, to kind of make work better. And you've got roles on your team really topping this list. So, again, I think that we can view this as really an opportunity to work differently and work alongside AI as we're entering this next era, so to speak.
So as working evolves, what are some ways that work is changing specifically? Like, let's talk about hiring and upskilling roles.
Yeah. I think we could talk about this in sort of like the people who are doing the hiring, or maybe leaders of the team, and then those who are getting hired, or perhaps are maybe earlier in their career in an individual contributor type role. And, look, I think you see it here in roles that stand to benefit from AI. I am hearing a few things role specific. One, and this, maybe is an exciting debate for another time, but I think a lot of folks are viewing the role of a knowledge manager, and I like to use knowledge over content, but knowledge or content manager, as becoming even more important and strategic for all the reasons we talked about: the opportunity for knowledge democratization, the fact that this knowledge is the bedrock for AI, that AI pulls from, but that role, so it's increasingly important, but it's evolving from, I'm going to clean up all this stuff in, a library, should you have a platform to manage this, to I'm going to focus on building the right relationships and driving those operational rhythms, and like I talked about earlier. And so it becomes more, and becoming more, deeply curious or engaged in how I'm working with those subject matter experts. I've actually heard of people who, imagine like I'm the SME, they're like putting in a bunch of stuff, like, how do I talk to Jennifer Cannizzaro? And it's like, it's like I would be profiled in AI, and you could develop questions to interview me as a SME. Like, teams are doing that. So I think there's, roles that have existed are going to have a more strategic relationship based focus, and arguably could be even more important. And I'd say that about knowledge management, even for like bidder proposal managers, like maybe that evolves to be more like a mini GM or general manager of the business, where again, you're looking more strategically, you're orchestrating, you're doing all these things. So I think that's really interesting. That's what I'm hearing from leaders. But the other area of opportunity for leaders, it's evolving those roles. It's evolving how you hire. And even, entry level jobs of the past are not entry level jobs of now. Strategy, curiosity, relationship building, arguably even more important for all the reasons I mentioned. But look, the role of a leader is also to bring people along on this journey. It's understanding that spectrum that I mentioned earlier. So like, who are the people embracing this, building agents, who's still, getting on board or struggling? How do you bring that together? I have conversations in, my own world, but also with this community around like, hey, can you bring an AI spotlight to every meeting where somebody shows what they're doing? Do you embed it into goals for people on your team? Are there maybe AI challenges or hackathons where you're getting people to brainstorm use cases and building together and showing that? And so if you're in that leadership position, it's looking at how do you evolve roles, how do you hire, how do you upskill the team, and how do you really weave it into the fabric of your culture and your DNA? Now, if you're earlier in your career, or maybe an individual contributor, I would say, like, in the past, it was sort of like, okay, you're an individual contributor. Now it's like, how can AI work for you? Like, you're not an individual contributor if AI is working for you. And so how can you really think about how you might embrace it? Can you teach your boss something? Can you teach your team something? And, show up in a different way. I also think for those earlier in their career, Gen Z, I'm looking at you. I know there were a lot of great conversations at BPC just a couple of weeks ago around like bridging gaps across generations and really getting people to work better together. But look, I'm reading stories every day about how Gen Zers are designing their life operating system using AI and AI agents. So are there ways in which you can be that person who's maybe shepherding the organization along? So I think there's a real opportunity at every level to really reimagine how you're working, what you're doing. And you're not on an island. I think it's so important to be doing this cohesively, to have a pulse on truly where people are, and to really get inspiration from not only your own team, from this community, from other parts of your organization, and just to know that this landscape is shifting. And one, like, I don't know who wants their job to stay the same for the next 10 years. Like, I personally think that would be boring. So can we maybe approach this with the mindset that says, this is exciting. How do I, and then the question is more like, how do I work with AI? How do I make work better? How do we really make this a part of the culture of our team, and really, really be able to shine a light on what ideas people have and what they're doing to drive impact, and really learn together?
So, I mean, I could imagine if remember that far end of the range where we said people are still waiting to embrace AI. What can be said? What can we say to those people to help them like with the striving to embrace AI? Because I could see where that would be really overwhelming. Like, because at this point, there are some people, like you said, already writing their own AI agents. So
Yeah.
how do they embrace this?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's like, first of all, you're not too late. I always like to start with the broader market view, right? We've seen a lot of data throughout this conversation about what leaders are doing differently, and sometimes I will look at that as like that could be my competition. So
Mhm.
I think this group likes to win. So what can, how can you really use this to win and to grow your career and really be kind of in that leader bar? But it's really also, again, I would come back to mindset. It's surround yourself with people who can show you what they're doing, shine a light on exciting use cases, and recognize that it's a force for good, but you've got to actually just start somewhere. And that can be small. In fact, I think it's best to start small such that you don't get discouraged, right? Maybe it's
Mhm.
taking a 15-minute class on prompting, or setting a meeting with someone in your network or in this community who's a little more advanced, and just say, tell me what you're doing. It could be as simple as just owning up to the fact that, like, hey, I'm not there yet. And I think what you'll find is the more that you're really honest and vulnerable to say, look, like, I'm not totally there, but I want to get there. I know there are people in this community who will swarm to help you. And
Mhm.
there are a lot of resources out there. And to me, it's really around first having the mindset to say, change is healthy, change is exciting, and change is really going to be good for me and stretch me in new ways in my career. So it's first having that mindset, and then it's also just doing. And here's the other thing I'll say,
Mhm.
like, if you're earlier in this journey, just because you try something and it doesn't work out the first time, try again, because I've I'm not perfect, right? No, none of us are perfect. Like, I've gone down and tried to build something or prompt in a certain way, and it really doesn't come out the way I intended. It might be that you're using the wrong tool. It might be that your prompting skills could use a brush up. It might be a number of different things. And so if it's a problem worth solving in an area that can really give you an advantage, then figure it out, and you're not alone. So I
Yeah.
think those are just some ways I might think about it.
Yeah, I love that. Um, so we've spoke about a lot of topics today, and let's put a wrapper on some of those that the audience can leave with a few takeaways that they can start working differently tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, because I always like to frame this as, what will you do differently? So here some thoughts. One, and I think this comes back to some of our dialogue around how you're engaging with executives, is really, answer the questions before they're asked. And this is on a number of different levels. What's your team's charter? What is the impact that you're driving? What's the business case for AI? What insights are you seeing about the business? And bring that forward proactively. This is a real opportunity. Don't wait for your boss or your boss's boss to ask you. Be ready with that. Um,
Mhm.
we talked about speaking the language of executives, and broadly about business case, for whether it's knowledge democratization or AI or otherwise. And so really being able to own and show your value in meaningful metrics that resonate with your peers and other stakeholders and executives is really critical. Knowledge democratization could probably be a whole separate conversation, but really putting knowledge to work can really amplify your value. So, thinking through how can you better scale that to more places through self-service, and even, using AI in some of those use cases, but also bear in mind, have some boundaries with your knowledge management strategy broadly. So you're kind of addressing both sides of that equation. And then finally, do more with more. And what I mean by that is this is really around the mindset with AI. It's you can pursue more opportunities and win more of them. And so I like to say this, and I stole this from Alexis at Microsoft, because it is really turning on its head the, do more with less, do more with more. There's a lot of opportunity out there. So how are you really thinking differently about how you're embracing AI and agents to grow your business, grow your career, and again, more volume, more wins, that sort of thing is really the opportunity.
That's right. All right. So for those of you who'd like to dive into this data a little bit deeper, I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. There are some spotlights of leading organizations that are sharing their best practices. Hopefully that will give you some more takeaways to start using today or even tomorrow. But you can scan right now, and we'll put this back up on the screen if you don't get the QR code here. But this is the way you can access that report. And as I mentioned earlier in our presentation, APMP is super excited to partner and work with Responsive on our Strategic Response Management Micro Certification, which will be launching July 11th. And you can find more information on that on our website at apmp.org. And there's already the study guide for that and some practice questions to prepare you for that launch on July 11th. And as I promised, there again, I told you I'd put that back up in case you didn't get it, but I'd like to transition to some questions. And we only have a few minutes, Jennifer. So I'd like to focus these questions potentially to which ones are going to be the most advantageous. So you mentioned several times self-service with the knowledge management. So how do you ensure that if you're doing self-service that the AI generated responses are accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, it starts with the knowledge in piece. So it's really, what's the origin of the self-service, and it comes down to the knowledge that you own and are, housing in, some sort of centralized repository. I think it's becoming more and more likely that probably everyone on this call has or maybe is thinking about a platform where you can do this. And so, starting with actually that centralized repository is important to then, provide that destination from which others can draw that content. That's one. The other thing is to really, as you're looking at platforms, look at any sort of, trust scoring type mechanisms that might be built in. This is something that we've really focused on at Responsive, is to actually have some measure of the quality in an AI generated response, and to tell you, if it scores a certain way, like where might it fall short? Is that, the source of the content itself, or did it actually really address the question that was being asked, et cetera? And so I do think that is going to become increasingly important as this knowledge is scaled into a self-service setting, is to really be able to say, it's not only that I got a response, it's that I can trust a response, because this is putting your brand on the line, in compliance and so on and so forth on the line. So I love the spirit of that question, because it really is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, here's another question from one of our attendees. How are hiring leaders recalibrating what they look for in resumes and interviews, especially with early career talent?
Yeah, I think that some of it's what I talked to earlier, which is, how are roles evolving, perhaps from, and this is something I've heard commonly, from authoring to editing, for instance. So skills, and it's important that you're not just like taking something at face value with AI. So this is one that I've heard quite a bit in that conversation of authoring to editing. It's like, how do you remain curious and strategic and give the proper oversight, even if you're not actually like taking the pen on the first draft as often? You still got to be able to assess the quality and kind of in this, sometimes tech can help, but you need to use your brain too, to really say like, where is AI playing a role? And then what does this then mean for human oversight? I think it is also putting more emphasis on these, the deeply human skills of strategy and relationship building and curiosity. And so being able to test for that, as well as testing for AI competencies in the hiring process, I think is becoming more common. And look, like we do this at our organization, like we actually have a set of questions and in some cases homework assignments that require people to discuss how they're using AI or maybe even show it. And that may not be universal right now, but I am increasingly hearing that as the way that leaders are kind of folding it into their process.
I think that's a really great point. And having those skills questions in regards to AI, and what a better way to demonstrate your competency than with the AI micro certification. Shameless plug. So here's another question that we have from one of our attendees. How do you overcome resistance on your team in adopting AI tools?
Yeah, I think one is to really like make it a safe space, particularly when you're that team leader. I mentioned earlier around, kind of making it okay for people to be vulnerable. And so, that starts with actually having the authentic conversations with people, or even just, the occasional anonymous survey to get a sense of where people are. And I've seen a number of leaders do this where they have pulsed, sentiment and adoption and that sort of thing on their team. And then in an anonymous way, but you can do it however, you may like. I personally think it's great to, if you've got the environment where you can allow people to share their concerns and vulnerability, because that really helps you then as a leader or manager kind of meet them where they are and say, oh, okay, like this is your hang up. Hear you. Like Sasha over here is an ace. Like maybe you guys can work together, or to just understand a few levels deeper. So I think it's important to, allow people to be vulnerable and really understand what's top of mind for them. That's really the first step. And then to be able to connect them to resources or other people on the team and really make it more of a team sport, because everyone's in a different stage and everyone can teach, some skill to someone else on the team. And so I really think it is about making it a safe space. I like to say, get comfortable being uncomfortable and like make it okay to be uncomfortable, because look, like you could be at the top of your game on AI, and you know what? The world will change tomorrow. And so we're all always learning. And I've said before, never in my career do I think there's been something that where I constantly feel behind as often as I do with AI, simply because of all the different developments there. So I do think it's really important to have that safe space and community around that, to really encourage people to kind of work together and to really take the time to understand what's on their mind. You may learn something about their reservations, and maybe they've got a concern that's really helpful for you to understand as a leader, because they're concerned about risk or something. And like, that's really important.
Yeah. All right. And I'm going to make this our final question. So really quick, we only have a minute. What do you guess the next big AI milestone our industry will experience in the next 12 to 18 months?
Oof. Oh, I love this. Okay. It's hard to pick one. I would say, I think we will start to move towards a system of agents. I have talked to some customers who are already thinking this way, meaning, I know you're like, Jennifer, wait a minute, you just talked about AI agents today, or I just learned about it. But imagine you have an agent who's looking at competitive intelligence and another one that's looking at likelihood of you winning a bid, and they're working together as a part of your upfront pursuit strategy. And, again, performing these specialized tasks that's helping the team. So I think there will be a movement around kind of bringing multiple agents together, and even the ability to build agents across systems. It's like a next level of partner ecosystem. I see that in the next 12 to 18 months. And I also see using AI and agents to really go deeper and broader in terms of use cases across the pursuit life cycle. So like right now, table stakes, it's like, yeah, you're going to use it for the first draft, et cetera, but to really look at a lot of the intelligence to inform the decisions that are being made, to improve, win-loss analysis, trend spotting, that sort of thing. I think there's so much potential here.
Well, I think that's super exciting, and I can't wait to see what our future looks like and how it's going to revolutionize our industry. And Jennifer, I just want to thank you. I want to thank Responsive. I want to thank your team for working on this state of strategic response management survey for our members here at APMP. I've had a lot of fun today, and I just wanted to thank you once again.
Well, thank you. This has been so much fun, and we look forward to continuing to do this research with you. It's a mouthful, isn't it? State of Strategic Response Management. But we look forward to continuing to do this every year and appreciate the conversation today. Thank you.